they should be providing you advice on your retirement plan for your employees, investment advice, that is, because they should be taking on some sort of fiduciary responsibility for selecting and monitoring the funds that are in your plan. Now, there are a few different varieties of that, so let's dive in a little bit there. The first is what we call ERISA Section 321, non-discretionary, and non-discretionary fiduciary. So the way that you can think about this is that they're on your team. They are your co-pilot, but they're still going to defer to you for the final direction that should be taken. So for example, maybe you need to replace a fund in your lineup, and they come to you and they say, we have 3 different options for this large cap value fund or something along those lines. Here's information about them. Here's a recommendation. But ultimately, you, client, you have the final say in what is selected and what's put in the plan. That's non-discretionary. Okay, so they're your teammate. They're certainly going to be on the hook for having suggested those 3, and they will not necessarily be on the hook for the decision that the plan sponsor made for adding it to the plan. All right, so that's the first one. The second one is what we call a ERISA Section 338 discretionary fiduciary. And notice that word discretion. Whenever you see that in an investment setting, it means that they don't have to ask permission. So in the 338 discretionary section, I think it was really intended back in the day for pension managers because they just would manage the pension without client input. But today, what this looks like is that the investment advisor has the ability to select the investments that go in the plan. If there's a replacement that needs to be made, they're taking on the liability for selecting that and putting it in the plan. And the plan sponsor is somewhat relieved of that. So they're not on the hook necessarily for the decisions that were made. Now, when it comes to fiduciary responsibility, you can never fully abdicate your fiduciary responsibility as a plan sponsor. If you are hiring service providers to take care of certain functions, like in this case, you'd be hiring an investment advisor to have discretion and make those decisions over the investments in the plan, well, guess what? You still have the duty to monitor them and make sure that they're doing their job. So this isn't just a set it and forget it kind of a situation. You still want to have periodic meetings where the investment advisor is telling you what they did, what they were thinking about, why, how the decisions were made, all that good stuff, so that you can evaluate whether or not they are doing their job. So that's still important. You can't just completely wash your hands of it. So non-discretionary and discretionary. When you have discretion, that means that you can make those changes without plan sponsor input. Now, having said that, there are some record keepers that still need to get instructions from the plan sponsor in order to make a change within the plan. There are many that will just accept it from the investment advisor directly, but there are others that still say the plan sponsor has to give us that direction. So there's a little bit of a murky area there. However, it still comes down to who made the decision. All right, one last type of fiduciary that I want to talk about. It's on the list of advisor benchmarking as a possible type of service that could be offered, but it's really rare for an investment advisor to offer this one. It's called ERISA 316, an administrative fiduciary. They're going to send the notices out for you. They're going to sign the 5,500. They're going to take on liability for the administrative parts of being the plan sponsor. So that's mainly notice delivery, things like that. This is really unusual for an investment advisor to ever offer, so I wouldn't go looking for that. There's usually a third-party administrator who does this type of function. Some cases you can do it through the record keeper, but they're going to have a separate entity, more than likely, that's taking on that role and that responsibility. And you want to be very sure of what they are providing. So in the 316 administrative role, garbage in, garbage out. If you give them bad addresses and they send those notices out, they're probably going to shrug their shoulders and say, sorry, you gave us bad addresses. Where the rubber hits the road on that contract is how far does their fiduciary liability actually extend? So since that's a little bit outside the investment advisor purview, I'm not going to go into more details on that, but just know that that is usually not an investment advisor thing that they perform.